AIS Quarterly. The AIS Research Exchange is a free event open to everyone in the information systems community. If you're not an AIS member, I would encourage you to take some time to look at the many benefits the organization has to offer and consider how we can help you grow in your profession. Also, please be sure to check out the AIS website to learn about the next 2 Research Exchange events, including how to navigate a revise and resubmit with Paul Pablo and Wai-Fang Bo on December 1st, and innovations at JAIS and CAIS with Dorothy Leidner and Fred Niederman on January 12th, 2021. So now let's get started. Let's see, hopefully. Yes, so I'm Cynthia Beath. I am a retired professor from the University of Texas at Austin. That means I no longer grade or do university service, but I still do research with my colleagues at the Center for Information Systems Research, CISR, at the MIT Sloan School. And we've recently published a book called Designed for Digital, which is about how firms organize to offer digital products and services. But I am just the host here to ask questions, and I'm going to introduce now Andrew Burton-Jones. Andrew, can you turn on your camera, your mic? Introduce. Burton-Jones is presently a professor at the University of Queensland in Australia. He is, in fact, an Australian, as we will notice, and he did his undergraduate work at the University of Queensland and his master's degree. And after working in the real world for a few years as a consultant, he joined the Ph.D. program at Georgia State University. After he finished, after he graduated, he took a position at the University of British Columbia and stayed there to get tenure at least for a few years. And in, I think, 2012, he went back to the University of Queensland, where he now is. Andrew has published scores of papers on how organizations can use information systems more effectively, how to improve systems analysis and design, and how to improve both information systems theory and methods. He is an AIS fellow, and he has received numerous awards for his research and also for his editorial work. And he's served on a number of editorial boards, and he is recently been selected to be the incoming editor-in-chief of MISQ Quarterly, which is why we are here today. Andrew's going to tell us about how he got there and what he's going to do next. So in general, so I have some questions for Andrew that I'm going to ask for about 30 minutes, so until about 8:38. And then I will ask questions that you pose to the Q&A feature. Because I can't find the Q&A feature right this second, but I'm assuming it's probably under the More button at the bottom. So I'll be keeping an eye on that. Please put your questions in there and upvote the ones that you think are the most interesting, and I will mine those to ask questions of Andrew for the next 15 minutes. And then we will go back to your tables so that you can discuss what you've heard till the hour or maybe a few minutes later than that. So, okay. So Andrew, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tell us how you got to be the editor-in-chief of MISQ. I mean, what was your path to this role?
Thank you, Cynthia. Look, I think part of it is just place. So I have come from University of Queensland and then Georgia State and then UBC, and all 3 of those institutions are really strongly service-oriented in the field. They've all had long associations with, for instance, the AIS, with the editorial boards and so on. So I think I've just taken on that mindset all the way through. Another aspect really is sort of choice. So early in my career, I have, and all the way through, really focused on reviewing and editing as like a really important part of my career. And I remember distinctly as a doctoral student, I had a whole bunch of books on academia, and one of them, there was some chapters around a particular person that a whole bunch of people had as an editor, and the phrase was, "Oh, I was lucky to have so-and-so as an editor of my paper." And I saw that several times, the same person. And I took that as inspiration at the time. I remember thinking, oh, I'd love to have been that person, you know, someone who can help other authors. And so I've really worked hard at editing it over the years and reviewing. Probably the last thing, Cynthia, is to be honest, just luck. So, you know, I've had particularly good mentors over the years or particular opportunities to get me to this point, I think. It's certainly not something that I would have thought possible even, you know, a few years ago.
So why did you take the role of editor-in-chief?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had to do some soul searching about that too, even in the period leading up to it. Look, I think part of it is I think we would all want to work in a field where everyone who can do something would want to do it. You know, you want to have that feeling there. You want to serve the field in whatever capacity you can. I have been on the board a long time, so I joined the board as an associate editor in 2009. And so I do have a lot of knowledge of how the board works. And over time, you probably, like in all roles, you have kind of an imposter syndrome where you don't feel like you necessarily deserve to be at the table. And then gradually you feel more and more confident in the role and you feel you have a pretty good understanding of the journal. And I think anyone who has been in the role for a while and feels they know how it works then should put their hand up and say, look, you know, I'd be willing to do this and I'd be happy to. And I think over the last year or two, I probably did start to feel a bit more confident that I had some knowledge of sort of how to do it. I must admit, though, over the last 6, 9, 12 months, I've been increasingly humbled by everything that Arun has managed to do. So on the one hand, he's been a huge inspiration to me and even in going for this role because, you know, he's been just really inspiring to work on the board with. On the other hand, it's just been a huge amount of work, and I, even though I felt I knew everything, I didn't realise quite how much he'd done. So that's been a really big eye-opening for me.
So for those of you who haven't been able to find the Q&A, I finally did find the Q&A. There's a tiny, if you looked, for me, it's on the right of my screen. There's a tiny little green arrow, a little carrot sticking out, very small. And if you click on that, the Q&A and chat and list of participants opens up. And you have to select the Q&A to get to the Q&A. I don't see any questions yet, but I hope you will ask some questions. So it's good that you brought up Arun. I think Arun really has done a fabulous job with the journal. My compliments to Arun. But what's the state of the journal as you see it at present?
Oh, very strong. So Arun had this trifecta vision, which many of you will know, sort of on range, speed, and impact. So on range, it was being able to be a big tent journal for the whole field, the full variety of genres, topics, methods in the field. Speed was to handle papers fast, to get feedback fast, to always be respectful of authors. And then impact, to really publish papers that move the field. That, in fact, I remember when Ritu was editor at ISR, she used to say, we publish papers that rock the world. I think you know, Arun has really been trying to do the same thing and really publishing papers that will have great scholarly impact and great practical impact. We've worked hard on all 3 of those initiatives. And if you go back to his original editorial where he mentioned the trifecta vision, he had a huge range of initiatives and he's basically done most of all of those things and succeeded on many of them. And I think all of the members of the board have been really proud to be part of that.
Great. Okay, so tell us about your vision for the journal.
Sure. So I think each editor really comes in wanting to affirm and keep going on the good things that the previous editors have done. And so that's certainly my intention. So to try to keep going on range, speed and impact. Another thing that Arun worked very hard on was the culture of the journal, and that's also something I'd be wanting to continue. So I did think hard though around how could you still find improvements. And so one thing I tried to do was I took the kind of work that Arun had been doing is focusing on our capabilities to strengthen our capabilities in doing things like range, speed and impact. So I tried to complement that by thinking of a stakeholder perspective. So if we keep going on the capabilities, but we then add a stakeholder perspective, and I saw 3 main stakeholder groups that I would really want the journal supporting. Our authors, our external stakeholders, so let's say industry practitioners, and then science itself. And so I saw that the role of the journal is providing the very best service possible for all of our authors, for our external stakeholders and science itself. And then I've thought of particular initiatives in each of those areas that hopefully if we can do continue on the capabilities work that are already done, and then add these initiatives for the stakeholders, that would be a good achievement for the field.
So what changes are you going to make?
Well, I can run through, for instance, examples on each of those things. So let's say with authors, what we would be wanting is for authors to feel and know that MISQ is the most author-focused journal in the field. And so what does that mean? So we should respect them. So we shouldn't be taking time that they shouldn't be spending. So reduce the number of rounds with reviewers so editors can take over things. Sometimes it'll even be in terms of guidance on reviews themselves, not having super long reviews that are not helpful for authors. Empowering authors. So one thing you'll notice with many authors through the review process is that they're defensive because they don't want to talk about the weaknesses and problems in their papers because they would feel the paper would be immediately rejected. But we want to empower authors so they can actually talk about the weaknesses and problems in their papers and then publish papers because of those problems. So the idea would be publishing imperfect but important papers and having a culture that's clear to the authors that that's celebrated. So we want to respect them, we want to empower them, and then we want to celebrate them. Once their papers are published, we want to be celebrating them more on social media, celebrating them more in other outlets. So respect, empower, and celebrate in terms of an author-focused journal. For external stakeholders, we can clarify the impact of our work for them. So one simple thing that many journals have done, which I will institute as well at the quarterly, is having impact statements or managerial summaries of our articles. You know, that this was done many years ago and then actually taken out. But we should be able to communicate simply and crisply the impact of our work beyond academia itself. And this is in line with many of the granting agencies also all around the world. Also, a low-hanging fruit is the practical implication sections of our papers themselves. We've worked very hard on improving our methods, our theories, our kind of hook in the introduction of a paper. All these sorts of things are very important. But the practical implications section of a paper is kind of that section that someone just writes at the end quickly to get it over and done with. I think that's never been a section authors and editors and reviewers have worked hard on, or maybe work as hard on as the other parts of the paper. But it should be just as every other part of a paper. So I think that's a low-hanging fruit that we can improve. And then we can also improve the social media communications with different industry groups and versioning our articles for different outlets and different industry groups to improve the impact of our work on industry. And then science itself, I can talk more about it if you're interested in sort of the responsible research movement. So that would be the initiatives in there.
Yeah, let's talk about responsible research. I find this a very good topic. So what is responsible research? Why responsible research, and why now?
I'm trying to think those questions in my mind.
I'll help you. We'll start. What
Yeah.
what is the essence of responsible research?
Yeah, so look, I think that there is a responsible research in business and management network, for instance. There is an initiative in this area and they have a formal definition around credibility and usefulness. So that's one, and I certainly support that. I think that's been a wonderful initiative. Look, I think there's also the more general notion of what we think of as responsible research, and that's I guess I would like to keep both in mind, so that the work by that particular network, they've operationalised it, which I support and I think we should support. But I'd also be more interested also in the general notion of it, that we have an ideal of science, like we have a personal view. Everyone in this room probably has their own view, and we want to do the best science possible. We want the journal to support the best science possible. So that's in terms of conceptual rigor, methodological rigor, transparency, truthfulness, all of these things. And also being aware of the systematic biases that can occur, whether it's biases related to diversity and sort of implicit biases, or biases to particular methods, biases that can occur in research methods and so on. So yeah, it's probably a longer answer than you needed, but I do have two particular initiatives in that area that I'd like to talk about if you're interested.
Yeah, I'm interested.
So one would be what I'd refer to as an infrastructure for research transparency. So essentially, you could think of this, a simple way of thinking about it is like the supplemental materials area of a journal. I think many of you have probably seen that there's no limit to these documents anymore. Like if you go online to different journals, we all have a good understanding of what goes in a paper, but I don't think there's a clear understanding of what goes in a supplemental materials. It's essentially like I would informally say it's like a junkyard for everything. Every idea any reviewer ever had, and everything that the author didn't want to take out of the paper, wanted to keep in there somewhere, is in Appendix J of some supplemental material. So, and then every, last robustness check asked by, reviewer number 3 or something. So when you mentioned I worked in practice, I worked in one of the big 4, and in auditing, for instance, the auditing profession, they lobby very hard around a thing called the audit expectation gap. So when they sign off on an audit report, they put their name on it, on the financial statements, and they say it's true and fair reflection of the financial position of a firm. They clarified what exactly they have audited and what they don't. They have to tell the capital markets that, otherwise they would, it would be unclear to everyone what they actually do. But for a scientific journal, I don't think it's actually clear. Like when MISQ puts its name on a paper, or ISR does, or JA, whatever journal does, what does that actually mean? Like we don't check everything, obviously, and we can't. So what is the scope of what we do? What is the scope of what we should do? What is the scope of what we should make available? What is the scope of what we should not make available, to future readers, for instance, interested in more details about the paper? So I'd love MISQ to take a lead in that discussion. We should have an infrastructure to store things. So maybe some more data or more information, more models, more, etc., for transparency purposes, but also some clear policies and guidelines about why we're providing certain information. What was the kind of information that was subject to review? What was information that we're providing to readers that may be helpful for future readers, but was not subject for review, and so on. I think that's going to be a really healthy discussion, a good discussion for the field. I'd love MISQ to sort of lead that. And because we have such a good variety of genres, we have an opportunity to sort of lead different disciplines and saying, look, this is how we can do it in being, I guess, understanding of all the different genres we publish, from formal work to highly interpretive or critical work to quantitative, qualitative, everything. So that's one thing I'd love to do. The second one is innovations in the editorial process. So there have been over the years a few innovations that people have tried. People have done ones with the reviewer names being open, or the author names being open. The whole review process itself being open. There's been different ones that have been trialled. Typically, they've been trialled and then nothing has stuck. So there's been, an individual editor may try something. So I'd love to try some innovations kind of formally, and then try to institutionalize them so that innovation forever, hopefully, will be available. So what I will be doing is setting up as options. I won't do this in the first year, probably. I'm thinking more probably in the second year, but having the option for authors to undergo a more innovative editorial process, and for editors to opt in to edit those papers, and then for us to talk about them in editorials, talk about them in ICIS panels, what we're learning from these things, and then to pick an innovation that we think works, and then try to institutionalize it so that sort of more innovative process will be available. One simple example in some of the more quantitative stuff is pre-registration of studies. That's just one example. So, but I'd love to try different examples that are suitable for different genres of the field. I hope that works.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is more modest than what I think of as responsible research movement, right? So I think of it as kind of a combination of being more relevant and being more open, right? And what you discussed first about putting more information up so that people can see it about the research is part of that open science. And the pre-registration of reports is part of open science too. So like open science is really different, a different way of doing research than most of us were trained to do and most of us are doing today, right? So I think there are, it sounds so laudable on the surface, but it implies many, many differences in how people do research. So and how they review research, but let's don't even go into the reviewing part of it, but the doing. What kinds of changes? So if you were to identify 2 or 3 changes that people would make sort of at the PhD program level to generate more open science so that people don't just feel like they're looking in each other's underwear, right? So that's kind of what it feels like sometimes when you read about it, right? Pre-registration, putting all of your models, all of your data someplace where people can see it. It sounds terrifying. So what kind of behavior changes, what 2 or 3 first behavior changes do you want to see for researchers?
Yeah, so one thing I'd like to emphasize is the fact that we do this in a considered way. So when I was talking about I'd like MISQ to take a lead in this, is not that we would just suddenly just say, we're doing X, and then, I think that would be, it wouldn't have any credibility if I just said that. So we have amazing editors and we have amazing authors in our field who I think have a very good understanding of the, let's say, open science movement, research transparency, responsible research, all of these sorts of things. The big issue in our field, which is a good issue, is that we're very diverse. So we have very different genres and we have to respect that. And the MISQ is totally committed to being a big tent journal representing the whole field. So what I'll be charging the SEs with is working with me to define what we would want in terms of openness, what that looks like for a highly interpretive or a highly critical theory paper, what that looks like for computational work, what that looks like for survey instrument type papers, what that looks like for conceptual papers. We have an opportunity to lead that discourse, lead that discussion because of our diversity that other fields simply don't have, because they're stuck in more narrow paradigms or sort of more singular paradigms. So we also have different countries. We're very diverse in terms of the different regions of the world compared to some that are more focused, I guess, in some regions. So different regions of the world have different understandings of transparency. Different granting agencies have different. So again, we need to lead that discourse. But it's, I think you talked about different what doctoral programs do. I think actually doctoral programs and doctoral students are probably far ahead of most of the senior professors. So I did do a talk at one university in the US, and in fact it was the doctoral students who were asking me the questions around transparency and pre-registration and data and all this sort of stuff. They're fully aware of this stuff and interested in it. So I don't have any nervousness at all. In terms of the specifics, Cynthia, I'd prefer to, rather than give you the specifics, to talk about just how we will do the specifics in a considered way. So the specifics will be, we will be doing this in a considered way, working with the best senior editors to define what the policies could be to work on this over the next period. I haven't actually started as the editor of the journal yet, and I will be working once I start on this initiative. And my goal would be to talk about it with the community. So, we hold panels on it, we talk about it in editorials and so on. So it's not some dramatic shift that people don't understand. Rather, it's just an evolution that we think of as natural and already discussed in the field.
So, so you refer to the journal as, you talk about diversity and inclusion in the journal, and let me ask you a question about the progression of the journal towards being a global journal. So MISQ was originally just a Region 1 journal, and expanded itself into being a global field. The the editorial board became more global, but the editorial board still is heavily Region 1 represented. And it was my impression that, I could be wrong about this, but it was my impression that Arun still felt like he was anchored in Region 1, but I hear you talking more globally. So do you think of MISQ as a global journal or as a Region 1 journal?
You know, I'm so surprised, and we don't have time to talk about it now probably, but next time I see you, I'll have to ask why you think it's why it even started as a Region 1. Look, I think it's definitely a global journal, and as far as in the whole entire time in my history in the field, I've thought of it as a global journal. The fact that some people move to the US, like a lot of people from the globe move to the US and study and work in the US. So, and then they move back. Like I went to study in the US and I came back to Australia. I'm not the first person outside Australia to be an editor of MISQ. I would love, yeah, I'm surprised. To be honest, it's a global journal and I feel it always has been. Of course, it can improve on that. There is an immense, I know the right word is probably not bias. There's maybe just institutional, maybe it's institutionalization. For instance, if you look at all of the top journals across all the business fields, most of them, the editors are in the US. That's just the nature of the business fields. But yeah, we have a great opportunity, I think.
Most of the business disciplines are mostly Western disciplines. That is, most of their members are in, like the Academy of Management, most of their members are in the US, right? They have like chapters elsewhere in the world, but the meetings are in the US and the journals are based in the US and the editors are in the US. Information systems is really the only global discipline in business schools.
Yeah, so I remember when I was at Georgia State, yeah, so I remember when I was at Georgia State, if my memory is correct, Eve McLean talked about the logo, and I think he said he designed the World Globe logo for AIS. So that for as long as AIS has been around, it's a global institution, right? So yeah, I totally support that, and the more I can do to support that, the better. Yeah, definitely.
So let me ask you one last question before we turn to some of the really good questions that the audience has posed, which you will enjoy looking at later, I'm sure. So what can the rest of us do to help you with what you want to do for MISQ? How can we pitch in?
That's a good question. Look, I think what I would say is actually not things that you can do for MISQ, but things you can do for the field. For instance, one reason I would say that, Cynthia, is let's say that 500 people email me with suggestions. There's only so much I can do for each thing that people say, or, you know, people could email, you know, offer things to various editors or the institution. It's hard to channel all this, but each of us can help our community, and by doing that, we're helping MISQ. So my biggest concern at the moment is this year has been a, you know, awful year all around the world, but it's emphasized inequities all around the world. And so my fear is for people who are already biases against them in various ways, people who are already disadvantaged in various ways, people who are, let's say, more junior people, et cetera, we need to support them. So the journal should support them, but as individual researchers, academics, as department chairs, et cetera, we need to support them. So that's probably the biggest thing we need to do. And if we can do that, we will help MISQ, because those people will feel more able to continue their work, hopefully submit papers, and participate in the field. So that's probably the biggest thing. Second thing, I guess, would be to engage with the quarterly. You know, we're compared to 10 years ago, you know, we run, for instance, 4 major workshops a year, or the development workshops, reviewing workshops. we participate in talks and panels, and we try to reach out to our sister disciplines and things. If everyone in the field can do that through participating in the quarterly in these workshops, that will help us, that will help you. If you can encourage, let's say when you're doing interdisciplinary work or talking with interdisciplinary colleagues, talk about MIS quarterly, hopefully talk about the other journals in the field as well. That will help all of us. And probably the last thing, Cynthia, this is probably not expected for me to say because, I'm the editor at MIS, will be the editor at MIS Quarterly, but we need more top journals. So if you have, I'm sure people in this room would have sat on promotion committees or internal political machination type environments in their own universities. And you will know that other areas, let's say they have 4 or 5, whatever, they'll say they're all top. And then we say, oh, well, we've only got X, where X is a small number. So we actually need more top journals. And so if you can all do what you can to support that, I would too. That's important for the field.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so let me tell you about some of the questions we have here. Actually, the question that has been upvoted most will be painful for you, I'm sure, but I am going to ask it anyway because it has been upvoted so many times, right? It says, Dear Andrew, this is heartfelt, Dear Andrew, I recently got an MISQ paper accepted, but have been extremely frustrated across multiple rounds with the lack of speed as the AE was sitting on the paper for months. How to publish timely? And my guess is there's a limit on the length. How can we publish research that is timely if our publication process is so slow? So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I can see the name Robert Gregory. I'm sorry, Robert, although congratulations on the paper. You published many great papers, so I'm glad you got another one. Look, under Arun's term, with all the previous EICs, but under Arun's term, there's really been a major focus on speed. And so their mantra was 60% in 60 days, 90% in 90 days. That was the kind of mantra the whole way through. I believe from the data I had seen, the mean was around 80 to 90 days. So papers, I guess, we felt that papers were being processed well. In general. However, there was a large standard deviation when we were going through this. And so what that means is that there's papers, a few papers where the process is going on too long. And, we have been working very hard as an editorial board to bring that down. My own view, which I will be working on with the SEs, is that rather than thinking of 60% in 60 days and 90% in 90 days. I would love it if we could get 90% in 60 days. And in fact, I've talked about this with the other editors, SEs and AEs, and if you simply followed the templated time periods, so if you actually do what Scholar One MIS Quarterly template tells you to do, like you're late on this review, do it, etc. If you follow the time, it would be under 60 days total from EIC to SE to AE to reviewers all the way back again. And so I believe we can do it. What we need to do is have that culture where an editor would say, it's getting too long, I will drop everything else and get it done. And we are working on that culture, but that's something that we still need to keep doing.
Okay, next question is going to be painful too. Hi, Andrew, this person says, how do you think MISQ can be more inclusive and diverse in terms of its topics and methods?
That's a good question. I think we are pretty inclusive and diverse, I think. Can I give you an example though of so I think, how would I put this? So I'm not aware of things that we would not publish. Like, in fact, yeah, Cynthia.
So there's a later specific question that asks about, will MISQ make room for philosophy under your editorship? So maybe that would be an example of something that we don't normally see in MISQ?
No, there definitely have been philosophical papers in MISQ over the years. So, yeah, look, I actually am not aware of any major ones. And you asked before, what could people do? So people can submit novel papers to MISQ. If they're aware that they have a genre that we haven't published, then I would be interested in publishing that genre. I can give you two examples of papers that I've talked with authors recently about. So one was a historical paper. The conversation was around, there hasn't been that many historical papers in the quarterly, and my answer was yes, and I'd love there to be more. Another paper was another conversation recently was around kind of digital futures, or what could the future have in store for us. Typically, epistemic kind of the way we think about knowledge is based on present data or past data. We don't know the future, so we can't theorize about it or predict it or explain. We don't know what's going to happen. So, however, if you asked a person in the lay, just a lay person, what do you think academics should be able to do? They should be able to say, well, where is the future heading? What should we do to prepare for this? And so the particular author was talking to me around having papers that kind of look in the future, futures theorizing. And I think that's a great idea. But we should be publishing all of the standard things. In fact, I really do think everything in that we're a big tent journal, we do everything.
So if somebody submits a paper with an edge topic or edge method, they should be sure and send you an email and tell you that they submitted it, so that you're aware of all these edge papers.
I'm aware of even an AE. The new AEs and SEs they're typically announced at ICIS. I know one when they wrote up, this person wrote up his or her bio, explicitly said, I like edgy or novel papers that are avant-garde, and I think that's great.
My portfolio at ISR when I was an SE as well. I got all the edge papers. It was fun.
Yeah.
So there's a question about AI-related research, and I think it says, other than the managerial implications and prediction, or the practical implications, what other component MISQ is expecting from data science papers? So I think this is kind of asking you about what does MISQ want to publish within the area of AI? Are we publishing? Do you want improvements in model and prediction, those kinds of things? So it's like, what's your view of that field? What's the niche for MISQ for AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. Although, to be honest, my answer would be straightforward. So let's say it's a computational. So let's say the paper is computational in nature. It's using AI methods. So let's say the AI or various other forms of computational data science are kind of the methods of the paper. Then just like in any other area, we want to know that those methods are done well. And we want to know that those methods are helping answer a question, and that there's a nice link between the motivation, the question, the methods that have been used, the results, the conclusions, impact of the paper, and that there's a nice impact that we can talk about. And that impact is relevant for our stakeholders. That's exactly the same as any other paper we publish. Now, it could be, though, that the paper is, so it depends on how this is interpreted, that the AI is more the topic area. It's not really the methods. It's about the implications of AI, and then it could be any particular method that's being used to study that, quantitative or qualitative. And again, I would use exactly the same approach. What's the question and the motivation? What's the methods that have been used? How does it link to the findings, the conclusions, and so on? So I would say exactly the same model. And we will have editors who can assess those papers and judge those papers. I guess the challenge of the field now is, because the field is so big and we do want to represent everybody, we have to have a large diversity of editors who can do stuff.
I saw Melissa was trying to sneak in here for a minute, and I think that means that we only had time for like one more question. So you talked a little bit about the pandemic. So, and then you talked about being a global journal, so I'll skip that one. But here's a question about contextualization that I find very interesting. Contextualization is often considered an incremental theoretical contribution, right? A test of the boundaries of a theory. However, contextual factors are important for ensuring practical relevance in many cases. So thoughts about this? Is MISQ interested in more research that is looking at contextualization of a theory?
Yeah, so Cynthia, you talked before a little bit about the responsible research movement, for instance, and we talked earlier, we said the definition was credibility and usefulness, and the examples I was giving were more on the credibility side. The usefulness, certainly this contextualization fits that very well, right? So let's say that we were only publishing very abstract work, very general work, and never actually talking about particular contexts, then we would not be being a very responsible journal. So we do need to do this, and it's a very good point by Anna Ruggini. So good point.
Yeah, I like it too. Okay, I think Melissa wants us to break up into the tables. Melissa, can you give us a high sign if that's what you were coming for? There are a couple more questions too.
It is indeed. We have time for just one more question if you'd like to ask, and then we can break up into the networking tables.
No, we can break up. I was thinking that was the last question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Melissa's going to return us to our tables for small group discussion, and Andrew and I are going to drop around to some tables if we can find an empty seat and say hi and maybe answer a couple more questions, and then Melissa will tell us when the session is officially over, and I believe they're going to leave the Remo up and running for a few minutes so that you can wrap up your table discussions. So thank you very much. Thank you so much, Andrew. This is great.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thanks, everybody.